Hello and welcome to another webinar as part of our International Approvals and Global Market Access webinar series. My name is Sherwin. I'm an International Approvals Project Manager here at Vista Laboratories. Thanks for joining us today. We will be going over Russia market access for electronics and electrical products. So some of the approval assessment authorities, EAC and FAC, are going to be our focus today. EAC, you might have heard of technical regulations, so TRCU. This is synonymous with the EAC approval. TRCU is the technical regulations of the Customs Union, and the Customs Union is now called the Eurasian Economic Union, EAEU, as of 2016. The EAEU consists of 5 countries: Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Armenia, and Kyrgyzstan. FAC is the Federal Agency of Communication for radio and telecom products. So we'll also be touching briefly on FSS or FSB, which is a Federal Security Service notification for certain products. You may have also heard of GOST approval. The GOST R marking was withdrawn in February 2013, but it still exists for some products not covered under the technical regulations, such as batteries. So this is something that we won't be touching on today, as well as RFC for high-frequency RF devices. So we'll primarily be focusing on EAC and FAC today. For more information on the other approvals, please send us a message at info@vista-compliance.com. So without further ado, let's begin. Starting with an overview of the major conformity assessment authorities of the EAEU and of Russia. The Eurasian Economic Commission, formerly known as the Eurasian Customs Union Commission, they published the TRs, which are the technical regulations, list the standards applicable for regulation, certification, and declaration in order to approve products, equipment, and goods within the Eurasian Economic Area. So the TRCU or EAC are common names for the Eurasian Conformity, and this pertains to the EMC safety and RoHS requirements for electrical and electronic products. The FAC is the Federal Communications Agency. They are part of the Russian national regulations, so this is on the national level. Their certification and declaration system has nothing to do with the EAEU as a whole, and it's only applicable for selling and operating telecom terminal and radio equipment in the Russian territory. So FSS or FSB is the Federal Security Service, and it's a notification by manufacturers for devices with encryption or cryptographic functionality. Again, there are other approvals that may apply, such as the GOST approval or the RFC approval, but primarily we'll focus on these conformity assessment schemes. So moving forward, let's begin with EAC or Eurasian Conformity. What is EAC? EAC is a product marking, which means Eurasian Conformity. It shows approval for products imported into the Eurasian Area Economic Union. It provides market access to all of Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Armenia, and Kyrgyzstan, and allows suppliers to distribute their products throughout the entire territory of these countries, which is roughly 180 million people. This marking is applicable in all industries, such as automotive, chemical, food, etc. So as you can see, the technical regulations cover a wide range of fields. Today we'll be focusing on some of the highlighted ones pertaining to EMC, electrical safety, etc. EAC approval is a single harmonized approval, meaning the single approval will cover multiple requirements such as EMC or safety, and applicable to all member states in the EAEU. So basically, any product imported to Russia will require the EAC mark, and the mark helps provide assurance of the product's compliance with existing safety, technical, and quality standards of the EAEU. So this list of technical regulations is not exhaustive, but the highlighted ones that are particularly relevant to electrical products are emphasized Now an overview of the different EAC approval schemes, the TRCU Certificate of Conformity, COC, and the TRCU Declaration of Conformity, DOC. So there's a few big differences. One of the main differences is that when declaring the manufacturer, will need to conduct the tests themselves, and they will still need to register their DOC with the authority. But for certification, the testing must be performed in country, and a certificate will be issued by the authority. So how to determine what applies? The product type is the most important factor in determining which scheme is applicable. The biggest differences, other than the testing, is that a factory inspection is required for the certification of conformity. It's also important to note that the COC and DOCs conforming to the TRCUs are different than the ones conforming to the TRs. Russia has its own technical regulations, TR, which applies only to Russia, while TRCU is applicable for the EAEU. Some of the products that are regulated under the EAC approval scheme is information technology equipment, household appliances, medical equipment, etc. Previously, this was the GO certification system, but was withdrawn in 2013 and is no longer valid. So any existing certificates issued prior to 2013 are no longer valid. This is what the EAC approval process looks like. We need to determine which requirements are applicable first. So for all electronic products, EMC requirements are applicable. And if the product operates at 50 to 1000 VAC or 75 to 1500 VDC, then the LVE, low voltage equipment, and RoHS, restriction of hazardous substances, requirements are applicable. The next step is to determine whether certification or declaration is required based on product type, electrical parameters, and HS code. Usually the EMC TRCU is accompanied by the LVE TRCU, so one approval document, one EAC approval can include both regulations, and it's very important that the declaration or certificate of conformity is provided during custom clearance. So what are the products regulated under the EMC technical regulations of the EAEU? This technical regulation came into force in 2013, and it's analogous to the EMC directive of the European Union. So for certification of conformity, some of the products that apply are electrical tools, musical instruments, personal electronic computers, etc. For declaration of conformity, anything that's not covered under the certification of conformity, as well as industrial electrical products. There are some exempt products such as wires, cords, cables, light bulbs, induction motors. Again, usually the EMC technical regulations are also accompanied by the low voltage equipment technical regulations, so one approval document can cover both of these. Next, we'll be moving on to the low voltage equipment regulated products. So low voltage equipment, this is the widest group of products that are exported to the EAEU and most common electrical devices that work within the EAEU. They operate at a nominal voltage of 50 VAC through 1000 VAC inclusively, or 75 VDC through 1500 VDC inclusively. The TRCU for the low voltage equipment is analogous to the low voltage directive of the European Union, which you might be familiar with. Some of the products that require certification are cables, electrical apparatus, electrical tools, household electrical appliances, electrical music instruments, etc. Declaration of conformity required for products not covered under the certification of conformity. And in general, the low voltage equipment technical regulations do not apply to ATEX or explosive environment electrical equipment, medical devices, other electrical equipment such as for lifts and elevators, and etc. So regulated products under the RoHS technical regulations of the EAEU. This is analogous to the RoHS hazardous substances regulations of the European Union. At the moment, these technical regulations specify the limitation of hazardous substances and electrical radio products put on the market for elements such as lead, mercury, cadmium, etc. Um, so some of the products regulated: electrical apparatus, household appliances, electronic computing machines, laptops, PCs, monitors, modems, keyboards, electrical tools, lighting equipment, etc. There is an exemption list, so products such as electronic toys, measuring instruments are exempt. So be aware that these requirements are mandatory effective March 1st, 2020, but it doesn't mean that if you put your product prior to this date into the EAU market that you don't need to show compliance after that date. Actually, anything after March 1st of 2020, you should have the EAU Declaration of Conformity or certification of conformity against those RoHS requirements. Now, taking a closer look at the Declaration of Conformity, some of the requirements: CB test report with CB certificate, CB EMC report, application forms, technical description, user manual in Russian language. Russian is the most widely used language in the EAU, but for shipments to other territories in the EAU, such as Belarus or Kazakhstan, a manual translated into the respective local language must be included. There is also strict market surveillance to confirm that this requirement's met. So whether you do a single multilingual guide or a separate guide, it's up to you. Draft label with necessary marking requirements, ISO 9001 certificate, report, and factory inspection are required. Local representative is required, so a foreign manufacturer must have a local applicant representative in the territory of Russia to issue the certificate or declaration to. Is something we can provide. Lead time is 2 to 4 weeks in general. I've seen it take longer. Validity 1 to 5 years, and the period can be decided by the applicant. Some of the responsibilities: providing this information, declaration of conformity, to Customs Authority. This is mandatory. Family model grouping is allowed for DOC under the EAC approval. Product modification should be communicated to the certification body or test lab. Minor changes don't require any new approval. Non-compliance is not, if it's found, then import is not allowed, and penalty in case of sale. Certification requirements under the EAC approval process. So in-country testing is required. 1 to 2 samples are required. Test reports are still required. Application forms, user manual in Russian. When shipping your product, hard copy user manual must be supplied, so it can't just be all in soft copies. Another big difference is the factory inspection. So it must be a TRC authorized factory inspector, which we can provide. The process is similar to the SIG 023 inspection process. However, they can't directly accept those reports for a TRC approval. Local representative still required. Lead time 4 to 6 weeks. I've seen it take up to 8 weeks, and validity 1 to 5 years with terms chosen by the manufacturer. Yearly inspection is required. So in some cases we can do on-site audits, but we still need to do generally yearly audit or retesting, re-reviewing of the quality system documents. Customs Union certification or EAC certification does not assume the renewal procedure, so the certification process must be repeated, including tests, production site audit if required, and then you will receive a new approval document after all that's completed. The EAC label marking, the marking requirements: the size must be at least 5 millimeters. The mark can be placed in any way that provides a clear visibility during the entire shelf life of the product. A single marking is applied to each unit of production, packaging, or documentation. The image should be black and white and contrast with the surface that it's applied on. Any markings that are misleading are not allowed, and other conformity assessment marks should not impair the visibility, clarity, and readability of the EAC mark. So basically, the EAC mark is a symbol that shows that the product has passed all established technical regulations of the Eurasian Economic Union, as well as the ones that pertain to the product. Um, so this mark must be affixed by the manufacturer, authorized person, importer, supplier before it is imported or circulates the EAEU market. So that means the COCs, Certificate of Conformity, and the DOCs should be issued before the mark is placed, and the mark must be placed before importing to the EAU. Here are some samples of the Declaration of Conformity and Certificate of Conformity. Consists of information such as applicant's general information, product description, manufacturer information, technical regulations that apply, any additional information, as well as the registration number. So that about sums it up for the EAC approval for EMC safety and RoHS. Now we'll be moving on to the next major conformity assessment scheme under the FAC, or the Federal Communications Agency for Telecommunications and Radio Products. This is part of the Russian national regulation, so it's on the national level, not on the level of the EAEU, and applicable only to the Russian territory for selling and operating radio telecom equipment. So any product that connects to the Russian public telecom network will require this approval. So, for example, it can be wireless connected via GSM, LTE, Wi-Fi, and so on, or it could be physically connected. For example, fax machine, router, VoIP equipment, and so on. So, what is the FAC? The Federal Communications Agency is responsible for providing public services, the management of state property, and law enforcement functions in the field of communication and information. So they ensure implementation of federal programs in this field, provide public services in the field of communication and information, as well as perform conformity assessment in this field. So all equipment that connect either directly or indirectly to the public telecom network, or PTN, or any equipment or software used in providing telecom service should be approved by the FAC. So even a power supply, battery, or optical cords should be approved by the FAC and registered in the FAC telecom system, as long as it connects to the public telecom network. So if it's part of a system that connects to a telecom network, it's still considered telecom equipment. Equipment that's not approved, so basically this is voluntary, so there are equipment that's not approved under FAC. There's actually no penalty, no product marking required, no limitation to import or clear customs, but most consumers, corporations, and buyers don't recognize non-FAC approved equipment. And there's also other restrictions. So for example, communications provider, they're not able to obtain a license for commercial activity unless it's FAC approved. So in some ways, this is actually mandatory. It's a mandatory approval. FAC is a Russian national authority, so these approvals are on a national level and not recognized by any other countries or territories within the EAEU. Also, similarly to the EAC approval schemes, the FAC approval schemes also consist of the Certificate of Conformity as well as the Declaration of Conformity. Moving forward, we'll go through the process of the approval. So this is what the approval process looks like. First, determine if it is connected to the public network of Russia, either directly or indirectly. If not, it's exempt from the FAC. And if so, then the FAC approval is mandatory. Then we need to verify if certification is mandatory based on existing lists on what's required for certification based on product type, electrical parameters, any HS codes, which standards apply. And through there, we'll find out if it's either requires certification or a declaration of conformity. So declaration of conformity, obviously we'll need testing, samples, documentation, and the certification process will require quality management system audit, as well as testing and annual inspections. From there, the declaration or certification is issued. Here are some of the regulated products under the FAC approval scheme. For declaration of conformity, you have antennas, wireless phones, satellite systems, cables, office PBX, public branch exchange, mobile phones, modems, network equipment, etc., data transmission systems, power supplies. For certification of conformity, wireless access equipment, radio broadcasting equipment, radio modems, transmission systems, also other data transmission systems, satellite systems, network access tools, telecom terminal equipment. There's many lists out there. So to find out specifically if your product is regulated under which scheme, then please let us know the HS code as well as the electrical properties to determine whether a declaration or certification is required. So the DOC process starts with submitting of the application documents as well as the test reports. And then we need to prepare the FCC recognized reports and draft the DOC. So it's possible to issue new reports according to the FAC telecom requirements based on your existing reports. This means no retesting if all the necessary technical information is there in your test report and documentation. These first two can take about 2.5 weeks, and then after that, application for FCC registration, which the lead time is determined by the FAC. Normally it will take 2 weeks. And lastly, the DOC is registered or it's not, and corrective actions are required. So it'll take another week or so for that to take place, and if the DOC is not registered successfully, then we need to update the documents or the draft declaration and start over, but this is not a common occurrence. So the declaration of conformity requirements under the FAC approval scheme. So testing generally not required. There's a list of radio products that can be imported without any radio approval testing. Samples can be required. Quality management system audit, application forms, technical description, and other documentation. A local representative is required as the declaration holder. Lead time 4 weeks, but some projects I've seen take 6 or more weeks. Validity, no expiration date, so the validity is unlimited, but we recommend 5 years. It's your responsibility of the applicant to choose the relevant validity dates that are pertaining to your usual product life cycle or model that you're applying for approval for. Modular approval is allowed, but we do recommend that approving as an end-user device may be better, because sometimes you need to convince some officials that this end-user product contains a pre-approved module. So sometimes it can be difficult. If you do modular approval, you need to have some information in the end product, in the manual, describing the built-in module device. Moving on, family model grouping is not allowed in the case of FAC declaration of conformity, but it is allowed for certification of conformity, which we'll be talking about in the next slide. Product modifications, minor changes do not require any new approval, but please let us know if any changes are required. No special marking or label for FAC, and non-compliance penalties can apply. Now moving on to the certification of conformity process, submission of application documents and test samples, and then functionality testing and FSS investigative testing. So this is the testing by the test lab local in Russia, or FSS investigative testing is for devices using encryption or cryptography. So this is not applicable to all radio or telecom products. And then registration of certification of conformity with the FAC, and lastly, the issuance of certification of conformity. So this whole process can take 3 to 4 months, so it's much longer than the DOC process, but it's not likely to be refused the issuance of the certificate of conformity. Requirements for certification under the FAC approval scheme. So in-country testing is required, samples are required, quality management system audit, application forms, technical description, and other documents. In this case, local representative is optional, unlike in the DOC case. Lead time is 8 to 10 weeks, but actually I've seen projects take up to 16 weeks, so it takes quite a long time. Validity 3 years at most, so it's much shorter than the other approval schemes. Modular approval is allowed, but again, some information supporting the end product containing a pre-approved module is required, and can sometimes be tedious. And responsibilities, annual inspection is required, family model grouping is allowed, product modifications are allowed, labeling, no special marking or label, and non-compliance penalties may apply, but there's no written violation yet for manufacturers and their representatives. This is still a voluntary approval scheme, but some changes are in process. Here we have a sample of the FAC Declaration of Conformity and Certificate of Conformity. So just to recap the major conformity assessment authorities, EEC, Eurasian Commission, and the EAC approval scheme, covering requirements such as EMC, safety, and RoHS for electronic products, and then FAC, Federal Communications Agency, covering requirements for telecom and radio products on the national level, and then now moving on to FSS, Federal Security Service, also on the Russia national level, for devices with encryption and cryptographic functionality. So what is FSS or FSB? FSS is the Federal Security Service, and the principal security agency of Russia. Main responsibilities include counterintelligence, internal and border security, counterterrorism, and surveillance. So all products that are capable of encryption need to be approved by the Federal Security Service in order to be successfully imported into the Customs Union. The special document called the FSS notification confirms that the product can be imported. So the FSS notification is a formal statement of permission to use the means of cryptography or encryption within a device in Russia. It's a mandatory document which is required to be provided during the customs clearance process in Russia. So this notification is for each model, and must only be registered once. So after that, any other party can use the same notification without any additional permission from the original notification holder who obtained the original FSS notification. There are no special national markings required for the FSS notification. So the FSS approval process is very straightforward. If the product has encryption or cryptographic algorithms, then the certification or the FSS notification is required. If not, then the product is exempt from FSS. Additionally, we need to ask if certification is required, meaning if the product is on the existing list of products required based on its product type, electrical parameters, and HS code. If so, then we need to go through the FSS process, which requires power of attorney, many documents, application, product spec, etc., and then the FSS is finally issued. So what exactly are the products regulated under FSS notification? Printers, photocopiers, fax machines with encryption function, devices of computers with functions of encryption, base stations that have cryptographic functions, etc., electronic integrated circuits that have cryptographic means. So previously, the main defining characteristic was that whether the device has the ability to encrypt data. That determines whether it's necessary to get the FSS notification and approval. Now we need to take into consideration the means of encryption. So if the product's capable of encryption but does not have one of the means of capable of encryption through one of the means in the list, then FSS notification is not required. In that case, it would be exempt, and an FSS exemption letter is issued and can be used as evidence while importing the goods. Here is a sample of the FSS notification document as well as some of the requirements. So a local representative is required. Lead time is 4 weeks. Validity does not expire. Family model grouping is allowed, and import is not allowed if this is not obtained. So that about wraps it up for the different conformity assessment authorities, as well as the different approval processes you may need to take within the EAU and Russia, depending on your product type, whether it's a declaration or conformity or certification of conformity is required. The EAC approval, Eurasian conformity, is for EMC safety and RoHS, and it's on the level of the EAU, while FAC and FSS are on a national level, FAC for telecom and radio, and FSS in special cases where there's cryptographic functionality for the device. Again, there's other approvals that may apply, such as the Ghost R mark or RFC for high frequency RF devices. That's the radio frequency conclusion. But these are the main ones that apply to electrical and electronic products and should get you started on type approval process, regulatory type approval process for Russia as well as the EAU. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. I really appreciate your time. I know it's a lot of information to squeeze into one presentation, so if you have any further questions, comments, or suggestions, please send them to us at info@vista-compliance.com. Vista Compliance Laboratories is a 17025 accredited EMC RF compliance test lab in the electrical field. We're also a 17065 accredited product certification body and recognized globally under a mutual recognition agreement. And we also provide certification and approval services for over 150 countries all over the world. So if you have any questions regarding regulations in different countries or any product-specific inquiries as to what requirements pertain to your device, feel free to send us an inquiry at our website, www.vista-compliance.com. And looking forward to our next webinar next month, where we'll be going over Africa, market access, and type approval processes for electrical and electronic equipment. So thank you and have a nice day. Bye-bye.